In this video, we will talk about file permissions and something called the mode of the file. Now I'm in a directory here called permsdir, and I've just created a number of files that have various permissions, and we'll just talk about these permissions as we work down the directory. Permissions, that's the RW and X stuff in that first column of the ls-l output. And the permissions are stored in something called the mode. It's actually 12 bits of data that are associated with every file that fully define all the permissions. And basically the permissions are divided into three sets. So you see there's an RW and an X, an RWX, RWX. There's three sets of permissions. The permissions are R for read, W for write, and X for execute. So there's three groups of three permissions. And if a particular permission is set, in the ls-l output you see the letter. If it's not set, that's where you see the dash. Now read permission, that's pretty obvious. It stands for being able to read the file, or being able to access the contents of the file. It may not be a text file, but you may still need to be able to access the contents of the file. Read permission gives you that. Write permission, fairly obvious probably, that means permission to modify the file. And finally, execute permission, it applies to executable files, obviously. And it means that you have permission to execute that file or that program. One special thing to note, if the file is a script, like a shell script, a Perl script, a Python script, a Ruby script, anything that's a plain text file that's intended to be used as an executable, in those cases you need both read and execute in order to execute the file, because you have to be able to access the text of the script as well as execute the script. So in these three groups from left to right, the first group is for the user who owns the file. The next group of permissions is for members of the group associated with the file. And the third group of permissions is for everybody else. So let's walk through the directory and discuss the permissions that we see. So the first file, everyone. We can see the permissions are read and write for all three groups. The first group, the owner of the file is Jeff. The owner of all the files is Jeff, and the group of all the files is my group, just to make this discussion easier. Jeff has read and write permission. Members of group my group have read and write permission, and everyone else has read and write permission. The next file, group look only, we see user Jeff can read and write the file, and members of the group my group can only read the file. They can't make any changes to it, but they can look at the file, and everyone else cannot do anything with the file. They can't look at it, they can't change it, they can't do anything. For the file just me, Jeff, can read and write, and no one else can do anything. We look at look only. This is actually a fairly common permission that you see on the look only. I have permission to read the file and make changes to it, and I've made it publicly visible. The members of my group can read the file, and everyone else can read the file. For the file my group, maybe this is some group project some of us are working on together. So I've given read and write permission to myself, and I've given read and write permission to the members of my group. But other people cannot see the file or do anything with it at all. The final three examples give some common permissions for executable files. The first one, X by all. This is something that I'm allowing anyone to execute, anyone to do anything with, except I'm the only one who can modify it. And the next one, X by group, I have given read, write, and execute to myself. So I can do anything with the file. Members of my group can read and execute, and the other people can't do anything with it. And then finally, the X just me. All these names obviously give some clue as to what the permissions are, but X just me, I'm the only one who can do anything with it. I can read, write, and execute, but nothing else. That's our introduction to permissions on files. Remember, it's the three groups for the user, the group, and everyone else, and the three permissions, read, write, and execute, and all the various combinations that those can do.